Welcome to The Color of My Voice, formerly The Outsider Philosopher. So, in my last episode, I mentioned that I'm going to be changing the name of the channel in stages and moving from doing philosophy to telling my personal story and sharing the worldview that story informs. Um, the Color of My Voice was actually the first podcast that I did. I was doing that last year, but I was covering some really controversial subjects and telling a very personal and raw story. And the stress of that kind of caught up to me, and I took the channel down. I started doing the Outsider Philosopher just as a project for fun, but also to push back on some ideas that were out there on YouTube that I disagreed with. So this episode I'm going to use just sort of as a bridge, a little bit of philosophy and a lot of current events. So the thumbnail for this is going to call Lex Fridman Tucker's tool. And my apologies to Lex Fridman. I'm a fan. I've been subscribed to the channel for a long time. I've really enjoyed his long form content. If I'm going on a long drive, Lex Fridman might be one of the first places I go to see if he's got something new there that I want to listen to as I'm driving. But his choice to give Tucker Carlson 3 hours recently, on the heels of this, propaganda piece that he did with Putin. I want to push back on that. I want to call bullshit. I want to say that that's a bad choice. It's clear that at this point, Tucker Carlson is working for the Russians, whether he's getting paid directly or whether, he feels that, somehow the Russians play into his grand plans. I don't know. I would not be surprised if he's getting, briefcases full of money from the Russians, perhaps golden bars at this point. Apparently, that's the way they get a lot of their um, influence done, right? But it's abundantly clear that Tucker's in the pocket of the Kremlin. And for somebody with integrity like Lex Fridman to give him a platform, just a couple weeks after this propaganda piece that he's done in the Kremlin, uh, after the horrors of the last 2 years in Ukraine, and then after, ruining the one chance that Russia had for democracy and installing himself as a de facto dictator. Um, for Lex Fridman to have chosen to put Tucker Carlson on, just a really bad look in my opinion. Now I'm going to say I have not actually watched the interview, and if you watched it and you felt like Lex did a great job of deconstructing Tucker, fine. Let me know in the comments. I'll check it out. But I do not have the stomach for 3 hours of Tucker Carlson. And that doesn't change my point because most of the battle is won and lost in the thumbnails. Most of the battle is won and lost in the stamp of approval that Lex Fridman gives Tucker Carlson. Most of the battle is won and lost in the first 2 minutes of the podcast. And so for a certain type of the population that engages in willful ignorance, at some level, they know they're ignorant. At some level, they know that they're being propagandized to, right? And they're complicit in that. And they know that there's this horrible, unjust, unnecessary war that the Russians have chosen to engage in, that Putin has chosen to engage in. And it should offend their sensibilities as a human being, and it should offend their sensibilities as an American, but it doesn't. And when they see Tucker on an outlet like Lex Fridman that just lets him sleep a little bit better at night. While he was on the Lex Fridman podcast, I saw it. He said there are Nazis in Ukraine on the Lex Fridman podcast. He said that the CIA is probably responsible for Navalny's death. The CIA assassinated. So fucking ridiculous. So what I'm going to do here is just share my screen and just set this up step by step. Okay, so here's the famous interview, right? And I tried to listen to as much of it as I could, and I listened to a lot of commentary afterwards. I mean, it was incredibly boring. And one thing I will give for Tucker was he wasn't as much of a bootlick as I thought he would be. Just in the sense that he laughed in Putin's face in a couple of places, and I don't know, what was behind that, but he did conduct himself in a way that at least makes me believe, makes me think, suspect that he thinks he's using Putin as much as Putin is clearly using him. All right, but here we have two known liars on screen with each other. Tucker's a known liar, and Putin's a known liar. Pathological liars at this point. Putin is a known killer. He's a butcher. Is Tucker a killer? Is Tucker a butcher? I don't know. He could be if he's willing to do what he's doing for Putin. I mean, it's so overused. It's one of those things where it doesn't have any impact. But when we call somebody a Nazi, what we're usually meaning is they're displaying, or what we want it to mean is they're displaying a behavior that shows that they would have been on the side of the Nazis in 1930s, 1940s Germany, that they wouldn't have stood up to the Nazis, and worse than that, they would have been wholehearted Nazis. And that's what I see in Tucker Carlson, because the sins of Putin and the Kremlin are so severe at this point that what he's doing just shows me that, if he were in Germany at that time, he would have been full bore. Okay. So I say they're both liars. Let's, I'm just going to go tab by tab here and show you why. So here is a recent video from Tucker Carlson. And what's the title here? They're using Ukraine to sabotage a potential Trump presidency. Ooh, like they've created this bloody war and, international conspiracy to sink the potential Trump presidency. But clearly, he's on Trump's side, just as he's on Putin's side. Yeah. Except we know he's a liar. And why do we know he's a liar? Because Tucker Carlson said in his own text that he hates Trump passionately. So when Fox got sued, over the whole Dominion election voting scandal in Discovery, here's in his own words, he typed these words in a text on January 4th, 2021, 2 days before January 6th. We are very, very close to being able to ignore Trump most nights, he wrote in a text. I truly can't wait. I hate him passionately. So this is how much of a liar he is. He knows that this is out. This is common knowledge. But he's still going to shill for Trump, who, in his own words, he hates passionately. All right. Now, I want everybody to know who Putin is. I want you to know about the 1999 Russian apartment bombings, when 4 Russian apartments were bombed, killing over 300 people, injuring more than 1,000. This is right when Yeltsin was handing the power to Putin, and Putin had very low approval ratings. And, this is what it looks like. These are, that's the aftermath. I mean, that's an entire apartment block just dropped to rubble. All right. They blamed it on the Chechens, and they used it as an excuse to go to war with Chechnya, which solidified Putin's power. Problem is, there was a fifth apartment that was set to be bombed. There was a live bomb in the basement. 3 people were arrested in connection with planning that bomb, and they all turned out to be FSB agents, former KGB. So the whole thing was a KGB plot. It was a false flag operation. You can look it up yourself, Russian apartment bombings. Anybody who's anybody in this sphere knows that Putin was responsible for those bombings. This is Alexander Litvinenko. He was a FSB agent who defected. He pointed the finger at Putin for that, and this is what happened to him in return for that. This is him sick in the hospital bed, lost all his hair because they poisoned him with polonium. And we know it was the Russians because that leaves a chemical signature, a radiation signature that they were actually able to trace on the flight all the way back to Russia. All right. And so if he was just spinning tails, why did they have to poison him? And, you know, how awful has the West been? How complicit has the West been, especially, the British, especially London, the financial community there, all these years, allowing Russian money to corrupt when we know, right? We know this is, how things got started. The Russian apartment bombings, 300 people killed, and more than 1,000 injured of his own people, just to solidify power. And so let's bring things up to the present day. I'm just wondering where all these MAGA guys are, the sound of freedom, right? Aren't you the guys worried about child trafficking and all that? Aren't you the ones out there with the AR-15s ready to, be action heroes and spring into action? And 19,000 children have been illegally taken by Russia since the war began. They are wiping their identities. They are sending them to re-education camps. They will place them in places like Siberia. And if you think that these are going to be loving families who adopt them, no. These kids are going to be treated like slaves, and they will be abused physically and sexually. You can bet your life on it. And just so you know that this is no bullshit, wanted for crimes against children, Vladimir Putin. So the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for the leader of a major nation. So, I'm just, when we got our man Tucker here just sort of softballing to Putin, let's keep in mind those Moscow apartment bombings. Let's keep in mind tens of thousands of Ukrainian children kidnapped, sent to families where, no, they will not. I mean, hopefully 1 or 2 of them will end up in a loving family, hopefully all of them, but we know that that won't be the case. They will be treated like slaves. So this is the bombing of a maternity ward in Ukraine. So this is an obviously pregnant woman escaping a hospital that was bombed on purpose. Just a scorched earth, total war policy on behalf of the Russians. Just so we're clear on that. This is an AP article on the Novokhovka Dam that was blown up by the Russians. They claimed, maybe a couple dozen were killed. The AP has gone in and done their own assessment, and it's at least in the hundreds. The worst man-made disaster in California history was the St. Francis Dam disaster. I actually visited the site again just a couple of days ago. I watched a documentary on it last year, and I went and found it, and it's there, and it's really haunting. It's super sad. The big, huge chunks of the dam are still in the riverbed. You can go and visit. When I went just a few days ago, there was nobody there. And so the Russians blew up the dam on purpose to make things difficult for the Ukrainian army. Hundreds of people were killed, entire towns were lost. I remember reading that even Russian troops were swept away in the aftermath. Um, so this is our KGB tool here. This is our Kremlin Putin mouthpiece. It took Tucker Carlson 73 seconds to accuse Ukraine of blowing up that dam. All right. So I just, just sort of setting the stage for who Tucker and who Putin are. All right. If anybody's forgetting, this is what Tucker Carlson is willfully, gleefully, intentfully participating in. And I can only assume how much money he is getting, through back channels from the KGB. So this is Tucker Carlson on Lex Fridman, and this is me pushing back against Lex Fridman, criticizing Lex Fridman and saying, just so you know, this is who you're dealing with, and this is what you are playing into. So this is just the opening segment. This is just the teaser. And listen to the number of lies that Tucker gets to put out there on Lex Fridman's podcast. The number of people are, oh, well, I heard it on Lex Fridman's podcast, so it must be true, or at least it's plausible. Let's listen to this ridiculousness.
He said very specifically, depending on the questions you ask Putin, you could be arrested or not. And I said, listen to what you're saying. You're saying the U.S. government has control over my questions and they'll arrest me if I ask the wrong question? How are we better than Putin if that's true? Killing.
Okay. How are we better than Putin? Well, I tried to lay the groundwork there. And of course, here's this guy that's a serial pathological liar who says he hates Trump and, just within the last few days, wants you to vote for Trump. So we know we can't trust a word he says. And so he's, doing the hit job on the American government. How do you know we're not that different from the Russians? It's, it's only fools who believe in ideals and democracies and that there might be anything better about America than anywhere else. And why don't we just let the Russians do what they want to do, since they play into, his politics anyway? I just, I can't sleep at night doing that, but just, I don't know who his allegations are about. I don't give a fuck. I'm not going to listen to him because I don't trust him further than I could throw him. But there, Lex Fridman has just allowed him to deliver. Right there, the game's already won. Right. And then let's hear some of this other ridiculousness he's going to say about Navalny's death.
Questions and they'll arrest me if I ask the wrong question? How are we better than Putin if that's true? Killing Navalny during the Munich Security Conference in the middle of a debate over $60 billion in Ukraine funding? Maybe the Russians are dumb. I didn't get that vibe at all. I don't think we kill people in other countries to affect election outcomes. Oh, wait. No, we do it a lot and have for 80 years.
Okay. What the fuck on that? So we managed to get to a former Soviet gulag site, or if it's a brand new prison, it is right next to where there were former Soviet gulag sites. That's north of the Arctic Circle, one of the most secure locations on Earth. We got inside the prison, killed our only hope for a political rival to Putin, and clearly to make the Russians look bad, to affect an election that isn't an election, that's a formality, that there was no chance of Navalny winning, certainly not if he's dead, right? But the whole premise of what he's saying relies on it looking bad for the Russians, so the Russians wouldn't want it done, but somehow we were able to infiltrate a Russian prison north of the Arctic Circle. Or Tucker's just straight up fucking evil. I don't know. It could be one or the other. So here we go. Just so that we're dealing with the, you know, the other end of it. We've got, are there Nazis in Ukraine? Tucker Carlson and Lex Fridman, right? I don't know why Lex would bother with a short like that with the big swastika there in the middle and the crazy dumb look on Tucker Carlson's face. But that's all somebody has to do, is to be scrolling through and go, are there Nazis in Ukraine, and see that it's got the Lex Fridman stamp of approval. I mean, he's got a lot of integrity on his podcast. He's got a good thing going. He's giving all of that intellectual capital to Tucker Carlson to, make that false equivalency in people's heads that there are Nazis in Ukraine, and so fuck it, they're Nazis in Ukraine, and so the Nazis are just as bad as the Russians, even though anybody can call themselves a Nazi. Just because they call themselves Nazis doesn't mean that they participated in. You get what I'm saying? And so, yes, apparently there is a very small faction of far right wingers, like there are in virtually all countries, that would have called themselves Nazis. And I don't know, maybe you would have called yourself a Nazi too if you came from a country that suffered the Holodomor, which is an enforced famine by the Soviets that killed somewhere between 5 and 10 million people in the 30s in the span of 2 years. Maybe the enemy of your enemy would be your friend. Maybe that's how you would look at it, right? But let's also keep in mind that this is an incredibly forward-looking country that elected a Jewish leader, right? If we're going to be, accusing people of being Nazis. So that's all you need right there. Before you even get into it, he's already been able to impugn the government without any proof. Serial liar. He's been able to impugn the CIA. Somehow they got a ninja into, a Soviet gulag north of the Arctic Circle, right? Snuck in the night and killed Navalny against Putin's wishes. And three, just drop that thought in people's heads that there are actual Nazis in Ukraine, and hey, why not just write the whole thing off? So this is Nadya from Pussy Riot. And so this is going to be my argument to Lex Fridman. And my question to Lex Fridman, how come you have 3 hours for Tucker Carlson, but you don't have 3 hours for Nadya from Pussy Riot? So if you don't know who Pussy Riot Pussy Riot was a punk band, of a feminist collective, still roughly exists. I mean, Nadya will be Nadya from Pussy Riot for the rest of her life. Nadya and another singer from Pussy Riot did 2 years in a Russian prison for a simple act of defiance in an Orthodox church. Putting on a balaclava, one of those face masks, knitted face mask. That was their look. Let's see. Let's show you here. That's them, right? And they went into an Orthodox church and jumped around and were rowdy. And for that, they spent 2 years in a Russian prison. You think that's nothing. I'm not going to say you, but just think about how much people grumbled about having to sit home and watch Netflix for 3 weeks while we sussed out this COVID thing. People still grumbling about, oh my God, government overreach. I've seen a lot of people online act like they did nothing. And you spend 2 years in a Russian prison for a simple act of defiance. Again, that's Putin. That's who Putin is. That's who the Russians are. Therefore, that is who Tucker Carlson is. And so here she's giving a speech. I'm not quite sure where this is. I feel like, it's obviously some art museum. I think it's in New York. Here's the important thing. When Navalny died, there were a lot of different takes on who Navalny was and was not. A lot of people make the case that he was oversold as an alternative to Putin. Maybe he wouldn't have been that different. Here's the importance of art and protest and signification. Listen to this entire speech by Nadya twice. And this was, just in the days after the death of Navalny. And she's eulogizing Navalny. And the members of Pussy Riot talk about how he was one of the first to reach out when they were in prison, et cetera, et cetera. When I heard her talk about her relationship with Navalny, that gave me not all I needed to know about Navalny, but that really solidified how I felt about Navalny, what his name means, who he would have been if he was a leader. Here's why. Pussy Riot goes hard. Nadya goes hard. She goes hard for gay rights. She goes hard for, rights of people of color, oppressed minorities, the whole thing. I don't actually feel like I would agree with a lot with Nadya, but I feel like I would have things to disagree with her on. But none of that matters because she goes hardcore on Putin being a thug, Putin being a dictator, Putin being a killer, the poison of Putin. When she has a public relationship with somebody like Navalny, that forces Navalny to mean something in a way that, so many other commentators are just too ineffectual to make a difference in the world. This young woman, I mean, she was like 22, 24, something like that when she went to prison. What she did, what she stood for, and if Navalny had, gotten out and been elected, and now Navalny's legacy moving forward will forever, at least in some way, be connected to Nadya and Pussy Riot and what Pussy Riot means. And that then creates space, massive space, for the right to protest, for the right to live one's life the way one feels fit, for, the right to art, for the right to free speech, all of those things. And I just wanted to point out how important that is and how, how effective what she has done in her art has done, and the rest of Pussy Riot and everybody else that's involved with that, in a way that, just so many commentators, I've seen people on the left try to take her down and, talk about how she's the worst punk band that NATO could buy. And it's like, well, man, I see Russian money everywhere on YouTube, left and right. So here is a collaboration, a collab that she did with Boys Noise. He's a German. He's a German Iraqi DJ. And it's a hardcore video. It's actually quite good. It's called Chastity. Check it out. But you'll see the importance of going hard in your freedom of speech in terms of making space for said freedom of speech. And this is a demeaning picture, a weak picture of Vladimir Putin. And this is a country right now in Russia where you will go to jail for holding up a blank piece of paper. I don't think Tucker talked about that. All right, so that's just me pushing back. Nadya from Pussy Riot does TED Talks. Nadya from Pussy Riot is gorgeous. Nadya from Pussy Riot is in a punk band named Pussy Riot. All of that is eminently clickable. She hasn't been on Joe Rogan. She hasn't been on Lex Fridman. She hasn't been on Chris Williams, this manosphere, brosphere, podcast sphere that I listen to a lot. And there's this anti-Ukraine sentiment. There's this false equivalency. There's this looking the other way when you've got a child killer, you've got a baby killer, you've got a woman killer, you've got a mass murderer in Putin. Watched a little clip of Joe Rogan the other day. He was talking about prison reform. We got $100 billion for Ukraine, but we can't look. We've probably already damaged the chances of worldwide democracy for the foreseeable future. If you don't have a democracy, democracy does not come cheap. That $100 billion going to Ukraine, number one, is $100 billion that stays here in America. We send them old weapons and then we spend that $100 billion here. Very, very little of that money has actually been cash that's sent to Ukraine. But they're in the horrible trouble that they're in because they stood up to Russian tyranny. They stood up to tyranny inside their own country. It's called the Revolution of Dignity, the Maidan Revolution. It happened in 2014. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians came to Maidan Square and protested against the secret police. And the president, who was a Kremlin man, had to flee. And that's when they went into his mansion and found his gold toilets in his private zoo. And oh yeah, Paul Manafort was his political advisor, and then of course became Trump's political advisor. So I don't know if you have a moral compass, if you can't follow me on this and see where right and wrong is. So anyways, thank you for clicking on this video, and I would like to grow this channel. So if you like what you've heard, please give me a like and a subscribe.